Good evening again. So we'll continue this evening with our exploration of breath meditation, techniques thereof. We spent the last few weeks looking specifically at the Anapanasati Sutta. I had thought to go to the Satipatthana Sutta this evening, but I decided against that because it's actually not breath meditation, really. It begins with the first tetra, but then it gets into body and feelings. It's not breath meditation. So I'm going to take a big jump. We're going to go to China. We're going to go to a teaching that emerged in the 6th century in China, which sounds like a big leap in time and space. But it's not that big a leap because we started off with the Visuddhimagga, Buddhaghosa, which is 4th century. So it's only 100 years, actually. And the teaching in China was, well, it's only 100 years, really. So I'll give you a little bit of the history. So the beginning of this is going to be foundational. It's going to be history and how we get there. And then we'll get into the text. Notionally, what we were doing in the last few weeks was we were exploring the early teachings of Buddhism from around the time of the Buddha. But actually, that's not quite true. It's close, but not quite. Because last week, for example, we were working with the Anapanasati Sutta. The primary texts that I use to elucidate that are contemporary. Thanissaro Bhikkhu, Buddhadasa. And as I said, the first text we spent a bit of time on was the Visuddhimagga, the Path of Perfection, which is basically the doctrinal document for Sri Lankan Theravadan Buddhism. And it was written in the 5th century. So these are all later accretions. It's the teachings that came down verbally, and then all later interpretations and commentaries. So that'll come back in a minute. Buddha died 450 BCE, something like that. Teachings spread across northern India, more broadly across India, Pakistan, what is now Pakistan, up into the Himalayas and Asia, South, and all the rest. So you had all these different schools of Buddhism emerge, and they were beginning to diverge. And you had different Abhidharma texts and different Vinayas, the Abhidharma being the more analytical, philosophical documents, and the Vinaya being the monastic code. And then and this was all happening through about 100 years BCE when the text first started to get written down. And it continued even after the texts were first written down. It continued for several hundred years. So around about this time, Buddhism started spreading into China. So in northern India at this time, you had all those different versions of the original Theravadan, what are now Theravadan teachings, but all the different schools had emerged. And you had a whole bunch of other things emerging. You had all these Prajnaparamita Sutras being written. You'd had Yogacara texts written. You'd had the Lotus Sutra. These are all Indian texts. And as Buddhism spread to China, these texts all moved to China. All these different teachings. Some of you have probably heard this analogy before. It's kind of like a couple of dump trucks back up to your house and they unload a bunch of cassette tapes. And you've got classical music, you've got Baroque, you've got some hip hop, you've got some disco, you've got some reggae. It all lands at the same time. And this is like Western music. It's like, how does all this fit together? This comes from the same school. How do we fit this together? So there was a lot of confusion early on while the teachings were mapped into Chinese indigenous spiritual practices, notably Confucianism and Taoism. But after it being floating around for a while and more teachings had landed, people started to try and take seriously. It started to become a teaching in and of its own right. It started to really take roots and became was becoming an indigenous Chinese form of Buddhism, grounded in some of the cultural and linguistic aspects of just the culture and these other traditions. The first of the great synthesizers was a guy by the name of Zhiyi. His dates were 538 to 597. So I got my years off, actually. Buddhaghosa was 5th century, I think. Did I say 4th century? Buddhaghosa was 5th century. This guy was 6th century. So he was the third patriarch of the Tiantai school. He's actually really the founder. And they made him the third patriarch by saying, well, his teacher was this person, his teacher was this, so we'll make that guy the founder. And so, but Zhiyi was just a seminal figure. He's the guy who wrote the text I'm going to be using this evening. And he did this incredible synthesis. And I could, at some point, I will probably talk you through a lot more about what that synthesis looked like. But I don't think this is the time or place to do that. Suffice it to say, he brought together all of the early teachings, all of the teachings that existed. He organized them, not chronologically, but he ordered them in a doctrinal system that fit with the worldview that he was evolving into. And it was one that then informed subsequent teachings and really still informs current East Asian Buddhism and therefore Chan and Zen and so forth. And the text we're going to use is called The Six Dharma Gates to the Sublime. The six Dharma gates are 6 approaches to breath meditation. So he brought breath meditation in, and he wrote this text expressly about breath meditation. It draws very clearly, and the author it draws very clearly from the emerging Abhidharma teachings of the early century CE. And the 6 Dharma gates, I'll read them to you. They are counting, cultivation, realization, counting, cultivation, realization, following. I've lost my track here. Counting, following, stabilization, concentration, turning, and purification, which is very similar to the list that Buddhaghosa has in the Visuddhimagga. If you remember, we went through a list of 8. It's basically these 6, and he stuck fixing was one he stuck in as a new third one, and then he stuck looking back at the end. So he came up with 8. But the 6 is the same list of 6 that shows up in a lot of the other teachings. And so it looks back, and then it also looks forward, because what you find if you really study this text and other texts from this time is all of the structure of the Pali teachings of the Buddha shows up in these teachings. And these teachings are what informs Chan and what informs Zen. It shows up in Chan, in Zen. It's just those become very compact, distilled ways of jumping straight to realization points. They leave a lot of the detail behind, but they're founded on this detail. This is that from which Chan comes. And it's basically this distillation of all of this Indian stuff, and specifically here, Anapanasati related commentaries. What he does, I'm going to jump to another one of his texts first, and then I'm going to go to this one. What Zhiyi does is he talks about the importance of calming and insight, shamatha and vipassana. In Chinese, Zhi and Guan. And you've heard me talk about this a lot too. It's very, very important. It's absolutely crucial. So he writes about these two topics as being the foundation. Um, he wrote four famous texts in China. The first is the Mohoji Guang, which is the great text of contemplation of calming and insight. Then he wrote a text which is translated as Dhyana Paramita. Dhyana is actually the Sanskrit word that we know as jhana, which is the Pali for absorption states. Dhyana is the word that becomes chan and then zen. So that's an indication of how those are just founded on this spirit of this practice of absorption. So it's called Dhyana Paramita. Another text that I'm going to quote from is called The Essentials of Buddhist Meditation, which is shorthand for the essentials for practicing calming and insight to dhyana meditation. That's the long form title for that text. Essentials for practicing calming and insight for dhyana meditation, which is exactly what all the breath meditation is about. Calming and insight in order to enter these absorption states. And then the fourth one is this text. So I'm going to quote from the Essentials. And when we finish this whole series on breath meditation, I think I might well go back and just walk through this text because it really is just a profound text. So a couple of quotes out of this. Calming constitutes the initial method through which one is able to suppress the fetters, those things which tie us. So that calming is what gives us that first taste of freedom, just relaxation, feeling unbound. Insight is the primary essential through which one is able to cut off delusions, to see clearly. We see this world in a completely mistaken way. We see things where there are no things. That's delusion. Insight cuts off delusion. Calming then is the wholesome provision with which one kindly nurtures the mind and consciousness. Insight then is the marvelous technique which stimulates the development of spiritual understanding. Calming is the supreme cause for the manifestation of dhyana absorption. Insight is the origin of wisdom. This is exactly what we did when we practiced with the Anapanasati Sutta. Remember what we did? We worked through 3 tetrads of seeing and calming. We watched the breath, long, slow, explored the breath, and then calmed the body. We watched the feeling tones, felt these very pleasant states emerge. And then we explored feeling tones in the body, and then we calmed that. And then we went to the mind, and we saw the quality of the mind. And then we gladdened and concentrated the mind. So we're exploring the mind. And then we liberated the mind, calmed the mind. So that's exactly what we were doing there with the body, with these feeling tones, and with the mind. That's calming. That's calming. That is the supreme cause for the manifestation of dhyana absorption. That's how we enter the jhanas. It's this calming. But if we just stay with calming, it's a vacation. It's very pleasant, but it doesn't take us anywhere. We get up, we get on with the world. We've not remembered anything. Nothing's changed. It was just very pleasant. And so we make mistakes again. We need to cultivate wisdom. Insight is the origin of wisdom. The fourth tetrad, impermanence. If you remember, in each of those guided meditations, we went back to the breath and we examined the breath. And from that settled state, we could clearly experience the impermanence of the breath, the ungraspability of the breath. We're deep in the body. We're not in our heads at that point. We're in the body where this kind of practice is available. So from that place, we can experience We can recognize that what we think of as breath is a perception. There's not really anything there to hold on to. And with that, we loosen up our sense of self. We loosen up our relationship with dukkha. And that changes how we relate to this body. It changes how we relate to the world because we're seeing things more clearly, cultivating insight, cultivating wisdom. So he says several other things in here about it, but that's enough. I mean, that's what this practice is at its root. It's calming and insight, working side by side. So he talks, so the six Dharma gates to the sublime. The six Dharma gates are six flavors of breath. The sublime, he describes in this text, is very clearly pointing at the third noble truth. The truth of the cessation of suffering must be fully realized. And he identifies in here the practice aspects of that, which this text is pointing us at experiencing are cessation, tranquility, the sublime, and abandonment. So he's using breath as the vehicle to realize freedom from suffering. That's it. And he actually in here alludes back to the Buddha's awakening, which is, this was the method the Buddha practiced. So there are 10 chapters in here. I'm going to spend, I don't know, however many weeks it takes, but it's going to take us a few weeks to get through this book. What he does is he takes the six gates and he works with them in different ways. He works with them directly, and then he works with them in reverse order, and he does all sorts of clever stuff with them, which we'll get into later. But he is deeply exploring working with breath meditation here. And this is, got another bookmark in here. What did I put that mark in there for? I think that was, bear with me a second. Oh, yeah, I know what that was. Okay, so let's just jump in. The first gate, counting. And the text is very compact, but what he's basically saying is counting, just counting. Counting the out-breaths. This is like the elementary stuff when our mind is too busy. We just go to counting. He's saying counting as a practice can take you all the way to full realization. That's all you need to do. And the way he describes that is you count, and that practice of counting as the anchor, as the guide, that's your method. That's what you hold on to, what you come back to. It allows your concentration to become stronger, to unify. So you are then just the counting. There's no you separate from the act of counting. Very somatic experience of counting. But then you reflect on the counting. And you see that the counting is empty. So he's taking this object that is the object we're using for calming, and then he's just turning that into an object we can use for the practice of insight. So the act of counting, what is a number? What does a number represent? Once you settle into the body, once you calm down, just as we experienced in those guided meditations where we went through to step 13, the impermanent step of the Anapanasati, when you're settled, there's this sort of non-dual state starts to emerge, and you relate to the breath not with the head but with the body, and you can experience there's nothing to hold on to. When you start really settling, these numbers start to lose their form. What is one? What is two? At that level, it doesn't mean anything. There is no one, there is no two, there is no three. There's just suchness. These are empty. These have no substance. They're absolutely arbitrary and abstract. You're probably all aware that there are languages in the world where it's like one, too many. Zero didn't exist in our languages until I think it came out of Arabic. We didn't used to have zero. Roman counting, which existed for the longest time, I, V. We look at that. How would you do advanced math with that? You can't. The way we relate to numbers is very strange, very useful, but very, very strange. And when you settle down and you really calm, you can start to experience quite how strange it is. It's all just a mind game. And what is this mind that's playing this game? So you really can move into directly experiencing emptiness just through the act of counting. That we can sever the delusions inherent in the station of neither perception nor non-perception, it says. It's going through the numbers of perception, and you just move through these stages: perception, non-perception. All we see is perception. Everything is a perception. But when you let go of the perception, you've got to be careful not to end up in non-perception, which is nihilism. So you can move into all of these just by exploring counting. And we can't do that talking about it, but it's what we did experience when we were going through those guided meditations. They're recorded if you wanted to go back and listen to them again, or you can do other ones. So following, Buddhaghosa called that one connection. And so he says, following, the practitioner becomes able to manifest the 16 superior phenomena. 16 superior phenomena might sound vaguely familiar. And when I say awareness the breath is entering, awareness the breath is exiting, awareness the breath is long or short, awareness the breath permeates the body, relinquishing all physical actions, the mental experience of joy, the mental experience of bliss. Starting to sound familiar? These are basically the steps of the Anapanasati. So following, he's basically saying it's following the steps of the Anapanasati. And then the last one here, the 16th step, is the contemplation of renunciation, which in Buddhaghosa's translation, Buddhadasa's translation rather, he calls tossing back. We've let go. Now we realize this was never ours in the first place, so we give it all back. Nothing's mine. Here he uses renunciation. What is meant by the contemplation of renunciation? And he does exactly the same. He says, with renunciation, what you're doing, contemplation is the word he brings in, and contemplation is the word used in Chinese. It's that guan, which is the word for insight, for vipassana. So the contemplation of renunciation is, what are we renouncing? What are we not renouncing? So this very act of calming can itself become the object of insight. So we calm, but we don't rest in being calm. This is where the method of staying on the method is so important. We don't rest in just being calm. We keep the mind sharp, we keep it focused, and we continue to examine, or we don't continue to examine, we investigate. We're not just calming, we're investigating. And that investigation is allowing us to go beyond these practices we're engaging in, where we're experiencing breathing in the body, we're experiencing piti and sukha, we're experiencing the mind and so forth, to investigating those phenomena, seeing those phenomena are all empty. They are just perceptions, nothing to hold on to, nothing to bind us. We're free of those things. So we use the breath, these different practices with the breath, to calm, and then to turn that practice of calming into this investigation that allows us to see through and see this is not a book. This makes it a book. It's not a book until I start throwing concepts around, until the mind starts assembling it, relating it to other things it's experienced in the past, and creating a book. So we do the same with the others. I'll just talk about, so I'll skip the middle two. The middle two are stabilization, which Buddha goes is fixing, and then contemplation, which Buddha goes is observing. We'll go to turning, turns back to the root and returns back to the root and returns to the source. So this is the kind of approach that really flowers in Chan and then in Zen. So we're breathing, turning back to the root and returning to the source. Where does the breathing come from? Oh, it's the air in the lungs. No, really. Where does breathing come from? What is the true source and origin of breath? You go through, well, it's the mental constructs. You end up recognizing that the thoughts of the breath are ephemeral, and so you let those go, and then you come back to the somatic experience of breathing. Where does that come from? Who is really breathing? Who is the real me who's breathing? What is that? The breath is ungraspable. What is this? What is this? And this is a practice that in Chan becomes koan practice. That's where the koan comes from. It's this kind of approach, just directly going to the source. It's not unpacking it in layers. It's not looking at the 12 links and saying, well, we'll start with feeling tone. Pay attention to feeling tone and do the body scans and look at all the different body sensations. It's going straight to this question of insight. Go straight to what is the source. Strip all the rest away. So you're using this method of the breath to sharpen the concentration, to give yourself somewhere to pay attention to, so that your concentration can strengthen, and you can unify. But underneath it, and so that's the shamatha, that's the basis for the jhana, for the settling, for the calming, for the sensations of peace. But that concentration, simultaneously, this practice of insight is cultivated, which is keeping that edge of concentration pointed forward, pointed at, so what is happening here? Yes, we're calming. That's great. Now, what's going on? What is calming? What is this experience of calm? Can't grasp it. What is that calm? When you feel calm, what is it? You feel it, you know it. Now show it to me. Describe it, really describe it in a way that I can understand what that feels like. You can't bring it forward. You're kind of stuck in this place where you can't bring it forward and bring it into the world, but you don't know where it comes from yet. So this is really diving into where does it come from? Turns back to the root and returns to the source. Which again, the word that comes up so many times, it's the central premise behind that approach, all of these approaches to insight in this tradition, is this word emptiness. And emptiness, as you know, is not nihilism. Emptiness is simply non-self. Emptiness shows up in the Pali Canon. When emptiness shows up, it's generally by way of talking of a progression. So it's generally by way of saying what's absent in order to leave room for what's present. So when you're working through the jhanas, the first jhana, you've got vitaka and vikara, which are applied and sustained thoughts or mental analysis. So they're present in the first jhana. Then you get to the second jhana, those have gone. That's one of the definitional attributes of the second jhana. Those have gone. You got piti and sukha, this rapture and pleasure. So they're present. Vitaka and vikara are absent. This state is empty of vitaka and vikara. Third jhana, pleasant abiding. Piti's gone. Present mindfulness, empty of piti. So in the Pali Canon, empty is used in that kind of way. As we move into Asia, the use of emptiness shifts, and it really simply means non-self. And what non-self means is there is no self separate from everything else. It means everything is relational. You can't find a me in anything. You can't find a you in anything. It's all defined by relationships. So what this turning back to the root and returning to the source is we find the emptiness of breath, the emptiness of the act of breathing, which is to say, it only exists because of everything else, and everything else can only exist with the breath. It's just, there's no separation. It's utterly mysterious. It's this aliveness and this empty and this. So that simultaneously, there's this potential that is an infinite point, and then there's the aliveness of the whole universe emerging out of it. But the place we start is by just directly experiencing the ungraspability of this, and then the lack of anything we can really call the breath. And then the sixth one, purification. The practitioner is able, through this breathing, to realize the fundamental purity of all the dharmas. So you're working with the breathing, and you realize the purity of the breath, and extrapolate the purity of all dharmas. And the purity means, as you're examining the breath, everything we think of as a taint, everything we think of as an encumbrance on the breath, is, number one, perfect. It's just our opinion that it's a problem. It's just fine. It's absolutely fine. If I wasn't deciding it was a problem, it absolutely wouldn't be. It's making my life uncomfortable. That's about your life, not about the thing, which is just fine. So Number one, those things that we think are impure actually aren't impure. And number two, they're also empty. So this purity is really another way of just describing emptiness, but it's approaching it from a different direction. So you can see what this text is doing here, and there's 10 chapters in here, and each of them approaches these six Dharma gates, these six aspects from a different direction, and we'll go through those. But broadly, what he's doing is he's going back to this traditional Indian-originated practice of breathing meditation, which had these six levels that have been documented across hundreds of years. And he said, okay, all this is good. It's great practice. And here is how we can use this. It's really working very hard with what the Buddha gave us in the fourth tetra. Here's how we can use this breath practice. Number one, to concentrate and bring in calm. But number two, really bring this practice of insight to bear, so we can use this to see through our illusions, to bring us not just peace right now when we're meditating, but to train us so we can experience lasting peace, because we learn how to change the way we experience the world and our lives. I've taken quite a while going through that first chapter, so I will stop there and we will talk for a few minutes. Let me press stop.